attending this session. I realise that this session clashes with the tribute session happening over there, and we've lost a lot of well-known ELT folk this past year, people like Simon Greenall, David Gredol, Ron Carter, and very recently Michael Lewis. We also lost a French teacher called Cécile Florente-Paspa, who's arguably has more relevance to what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so the story so far for me is that about a couple of years ago I did an interview for TalkSeek, for Time to Talk Day, which is a national day in the UK to talk about mental health issues, and that was in February 2017. I've done some research into the mental health of English language teachers in December of that year, research which got 501 different responses from English teaching professionals or teaching professionals from around the world, and subsequently that formed the basis for my talk at IATEFL, the first ever talk that I've ever given at any conference in Brighton last year. I've since done webinars for IATEFL, International House, and the Braz Teasel Mental Health Group, Mental Health SIG, and I've also done workshops for Lundosa, in ELT Malta, and in January of this year for the English UK Academic Conference. I also had an article in EL Gazette last summer, and I plan to do more in the future. First of all, a disclaimer. I'm not a trained doctor, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't call this session mental health training. In fact, IATEFL explicitly told me not to use the word training when I gave the webinar last year, just to cover themselves, basically. The reason is because I'm not qualified. But I am qualified to talk about this from personal experience. I can draw on research that I've done, I can draw on the webinars and workshops that I've given already, I can draw on my personal experience and other people's blogs and books and personal stories. In fact, 6 years ago, this week, was the IATEFL conference here in Liverpool, and I was staying in the Ibis Hotel. Many of you, anyone staying in the Ibis? So, the reason I'm saying that is because for a lot of that conference, I was in my hotel room, unable to leave. I was struggling with acute anxiety, and even talking about it brings the emotions back. For about 4 or 5 hours, I tried to leave my hotel room, and I was crippled with anxiety. And I remember being at that conference, but I don't really remember it other than just being a blur. And I've counted that 12 times in my career I've been at a conference, or I've done a course which I paid for, or I've taken on a job in a foreign country or here in the UK, and my anxiety has got the better of me, and I've had to leave that course or that job. It's slightly ironic that my name is Longwell, and that I come from a place in North Norfolk called Wales next to the sea. And I'll talk about well-being very soon. So, and I will also share about 60-odd bookmarks, my own personal bookmarks, with you at the end. Some background. A jointly published education support partnership YouGov Health Survey in 2017 highlighted that a majority of educational professionals in the UK disclosed that they have faced physical and mental health issues which they attribute to their work. Overall, 3/4 of the profession report experiencing behavioural, psychological or physical symptoms where work was a contributing factor, and this is significantly higher than the UK working population overall. Education professionals report high levels of work stress, with nearly a third saying that the job has made them feel stressed most or all of the time in the past few weeks. And again, this is higher than the general UK workforce at 18%. Now, campaigners like Natasha Devon in the UK do a lot of work in pushing the issue of employers supporting workers, which includes mental health aid first aiders and how media report mental health issues, while Tess, on the right, recently reported, perhaps unsurprisingly to us, that teachers work more unpaid overtime than anyone else. I'd like to consider some questions that come from my research. Is it ever right to disclose a mental health condition up front or in an interview? What are the factors that cause stress in ELT? In what ways Can employers and institutions support the mental health or well-being of its employees? How confident do you feel at recognising symptoms of poor mental health in teachers? And have you ever received training in how to support teachers' mental health? First question then. Is it ever right to disclose a mental health condition up front or in an interview? I'd like you to talk to somebody next to you for a couple of minutes.
I agree.
I think it's important as well because when people are living abroad, that is, and you're transitioning, there's cultural shocks, living away from home.
Especially with high pressure.
Okay. Quick straw poll, yes? No? Maybe? Give me some feedback, what do you think?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Who said yes? Why?
Because, on our application form, we asked you, do you have any condition or disability which you would like us to take into consideration during the interview process so that we can support you? And if people don't share that, then we can't support them right from the start. Okay. I understand people might think, oh, if I disclose something, I won't get the job, and they think it's a trick. But I think we have to try and work as openly and honestly as we can and say to people, look, we want to support you and help you, but we can't do it if we don't know. Okay.
So from an employer's point of view, supporting the teacher in the workplace, yeah. So disclosure is better, yes?
I would just, I totally agree with you. We have the same process as well where I work. But I would also say, I don't feel like it might be right to disclose that in an interview because how is that different from disclosing like your medical history in an interview? It's not pertinent to the job. And once you're hired, if you need accommodations, then absolutely you need to work with the employer for that.
But is it pertinent? You said about it being pertinent to the job.
I think it depends if it is pertinent to the job.
Okay, so then it gets into a maybe territory. Anyone else for that? Yes.
I sort of agree with this lady that if it's pertinent to the job, I don't think it's in the interests of the employee nor the employer that it not be discussed at interview stage if it is going to affect your ability to do the job that you may be offered.
Yeah.
And I think if somebody discloses that at interview stage, then the employer can take it realistically, one would hope, can take it into consideration and see if the job offer can be adapted appropriately.
But is it better to wait until something happens and then to deal with the circumstance?
No.
Okay, I'm going to move on. A guy called Tom Rogers, who's a history teacher, he's now working in Ljubljana, Slovenia, is a big following on Twitter. And I volunteered with Tom in Tanzania, can't even say the word, Tanzania. I keep saying Tanzania, that's how my Saudi students call it. He's written a lot about mental health and his own personal struggles. He writes mostly about high school teaching. And in a recent article about disclosure, he reported that 2/3 of teachers would not disclose in an interview or health check from occupational health in relation to starting a new job or PGCE. And this was a sample tweeted poll which got over 3,000 responses, so unscientific, not academically sound, but probably representative of the current stigma. As I say, 67% no. Obviously there's no way to give further information of why, how they would justify that. Question 2. Oh, before I go on to question 2, British Council tweeted this the other day from their Facebook page. I don't know who runs their social media, but he just said, teaching can be very stressful. What tips do you have to maintain a healthy work-life balance? Everyone feels tired at times, but professional burnout is a different monster. It can seriously affect job performance, may result in physical illness, and is even contagious. And they linked to a 2015 article by Aggie Enyedi, who spoke at this conference in 2015 for the Lansing. It was all about burnout. I wasn't there because I was part of another sick. So, how can teachers avoid burnout? If you go to the article, it's very good, it's great, but it's all about what the individual can do. But I'll come on to that more in a minute. Let me ask you the second question. So the second question is this: what are the factors that cause stress in ELT? Again, another couple of minutes, talk to somebody near you. Mirroring. It's like what Chris was talking about earlier in terms of everyone's going for the healthy food.
So behaviour management technique in the young learner class.
We used to do it at Girl Guides. Different Girl Guides.
Okay, I've used this slide before, so apologies if you've seen exactly the same slide. It's slightly tweaked it, but well, before I show you the slide, what do you think? Stresses in ELT?
Precarious nature of working conditions.
Precarious nature of working conditions.
That kindly.
Yeah.
In our school, I say that they've got a new job in a new country. So most of my teachers are brand new, fresh off Salta, never lived abroad before. So new job, new country, new language, new flatmates, new school, new colleagues, new working life. A lot of them are fresh out of uni. New way of approaching work. Like they've never done that before, and I say to them, if they don't get stressed, I'm more worried than if they do.
Anything else? Yeah, thank you.
I think teaching teenagers is also challenging. I know many secondary school teachers at the moment are cracking because they just can't cope with the job altogether. And it's all across Europe, I've read, not just on the continent, but it's not easy to teach teenagers. There's so many changes happening in their lives that you have to be ready to take this on when you enter the classroom.
And that causes the teacher stress.
Yes, exactly.
To expand on that, I think teaching in general, I think for me it's always been just horrifically stressful. Like still now, after like a decade and a half of doing it, like standing in front of students with that constant judgment that's going on in here, like is not necessarily going on in there.
Is that imposter syndrome perhaps?
I think it was to begin with. I'm sure it's not anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
I think what you said there, the physical visibility of being a teacher is very different to feel stressed in an office at a desk or on the phone, where you can to a certain extent choose your moments of interaction. Then at 5 o'clock you have to stand up in front of these people and you have to stay there until 6 o'clock, for example. There's no...
You don't have a performance.
Exactly.
There's a certain thing that you're a performer, you're on a stage, you're there in the spotlight.
And if things go wrong, it's our fault, not theirs as well.
But I think the spin of that then as well is the classroom can be the place where you go to forget everything else. So not only can it be the place where the stress is, it can be the place where you go to get away from all the other things.
Especially if you're a manager.
Okay. Okay, here's some ideas that came from my research. So perfectionism, workload, working conditions, as Kira mentioned, we'll come back to that. Job insecurity, poor pay, 0 hours contract, demanding parents, misbehaving students, put teenagers in there. Homesickness, Sandy, you talked a lot about homesickness, lack of support, meeting deadlines, culture shock, excessive responsibility, unrealistic expectations. I've got demanding parents twice for some reason. Maybe it was on my mind at that time. Constant observations, imposter syndrome, which I mentioned, the feeling you're a fraud, don't deserve to be there. Harassment, bullying, a lot of that goes on. Peer pressure, administration duties, threat of inspection, and my personal individual learning plans. I know that stress has been often referred to as this, and I know Sarah Mercer has mentioned this in her webinars that she's given her talks. This comes from a book called The Elephant in the Staff Room. Stress occurs where there is a mismatch between perceived pressures of the work situation and the individual's ability to cope with it. Okay, question 3. In what ways can employers and institutions support the mental health of well-being of its employees? Again, it's another question from my research. Again, 2 minutes, I'd like you to talk about it and come up with some ideas. Before I put some common responses in the survey, give me some suggestions.
I have no personal experience of it, but I've noticed, like having first aid people, mental health first aiders. So somebody designated with that role. If somebody's having a moment like that, they're there to come and
So a mental health first aider, similar to the legislation in this country, that a business of a certain size has to have a first aider, but not necessarily a mental health first aider, and they thought, well, that we've got a first aider, let's subsume the role of mental health first aider with that role maybe. So.
No, separate person.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. But okay, so there's the logistics and the practicalities of being able to afford to do that.
Yeah, so this is something that they can do.
Ah, good. Thank you. So, yeah, they can. Cool.
I'm just building on that, so my work offers mental health first aid training to all of its employees. So I have that training because I manage different professors in the EP program. But anyone can take the training. So I encourage all of my faculty to take the training just so that they can understand themselves what's going on and all of my support stuff. So that's available to everybody.
That's fantastic.
So I feel like it's been helpful.
That's good. Great. That's good. Anyone else?
Where I work, we have I work at a charity for the homeless, so our clients are already sometimes very problematical people for a whole sort of reasons. But once a month, we have what's called reflective teaching, and there's an outside consultant, a psychologist who comes from the outside, not an employee of Crisis except for to do this consultancy. We sit around in a circle, all of the staff, every counselor, every tutor, every person who works there. And then she goes around person by person and say, how are you feeling? Everybody. And most people say, fine. And then somebody says, today was terrible. And then it might be because a particular client was very, very problematic, or it might be because somebody felt overworked, or it might be. And so that space, we're allowed to just say whatever. It never leaves the room. It doesn't go to higher management. And I find it really good because sometimes you think that, oh, it's just me. This is really not a big deal, you know. And then you say something, and then everybody else goes, yeah, I get it. And then it suddenly, any problem that might appear small suddenly becomes shared with everybody. And so that there's a kind of, it bonds everybody together. It's really, I find it to be really
So a problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to move on and just say, so training, as Mike mentioned, counselling, pay, job security, working conditions. This keeps coming up.
Sorry, can I just say, I think it's really important, you mentioned earlier, like finding a day to talk, like in my experience, it's got to start with disclosure, because if people don't want to admit to their colleagues.
So can I ask you a question of why people don't disclose?
Because they don't feel confident or comfortable and safe in doing it. So that's why I'm saying the first thing you have to do is to create an environment where everybody shares.
So we create an environment, we foster an environment, and we encourage people to disclose so that they can be supported. Good. Working conditions is very much an issue. And we've already talked about pay, job security, and working conditions, and even Paula Babadeo in her plenary yesterday was talking about teacher empowerment, and that I think she said in her summary, teachers get used and abused, and she also explicitly mentioned working conditions and even suggested to join a union. I mean, working conditions is an issue that has been mentioned by several people in my survey and continues to be pushed often outside of IATEFL. And you probably can't see these, but these will be on the slides. So these are quotes from people that talked about working conditions in ELT. I'll just pick one of them, the second one. Respect teaching as a lifelong career, support teachers struggling with managers and owners who are clearly suffering from exploitative employment, create special interest groups supporting and networking teachers struggling for safe pay, conditions and terms of employment, work to free teachers from discrimination, recognise our rights and advocate for them. Now, teachers taking responsibility for their own well-being has been spoken about at this conference already. And there are critical voices outside of IATEFL and a few inside too. And somebody who does this is Paul Walsh. He's a leading voice, and he was the person who interviewed me for the Time to Change Day for the Toolsig website a couple of years ago. And he states there's nothing wrong in talking about well-being, a new buzzword, as he says. In one article he wrote last year, he referred to Sarah Mercer's IATEFL plenary in Glasgow, the International House Wellbeing series that both Sarah and I were part of, and my own research. And he stated clearly that he had no problem with teachers feeling in control, being healthy or feeling good. His problem was that the current conditions determine to a large extent who gets to feel good. The existence of such conditions cannot be wished away by medication, self-care, or positive thinking. And this was exactly the belief shared by one of the respondents in my research. I'm worried too much of a focus on the psychology and well-being of teachers detracts from the broader systemic issues that cause these issues in the first place. Now, there is a concern in the ELT industry that merely talking about well-being will not do anything to change systematic problems. The economic foundations of a system that cause the crap working conditions, the stress, the anxiety, the mental exhaustion, and may act more to forestall change than start it. And there are numerous reasons for stress and anxiety amongst language teachers, which include poor working conditions, poor pay, insecure or temporary contracts, and lots of other systemic economic issues. Now, I've always been reluctant to conclude that poor working conditions cause poor mental health in the first place. But they certainly don't help. And advocacy groups like ELT Ireland and ELT Manchester are actively supporting teachers as workers now. Local organisations supporting teachers, while perhaps international teachers' associations are sometimes found wanting. I have sympathy with this view. Well-being isn't just what the individual can do. It is also about systemic change and what an institution can do. So let's return to the institution and what the employer can do. Question 4. How confident do you feel at recognising symptoms of poor mental health in teachers? Very quick. I'm not asking you to discuss, just quickly. Yes, not at all, fairly confident, very confident. Fairly? Fairly? Anyone think they are very confident? What would you need to be very confident? Training. Be a mind reader. Yeah, we need a bit more than just mind reading. Not at all.
I think teachers often work alone in their classrooms. True. So how do you don't necessarily meet the teacher very often. I mean, it depends, of course, where you work, but it's very easy to just stay out of everybody's way. You don't necessarily meet them very often. So how would you know?
How would you know?
Sorry, sometimes as well, I think if you've suffered a problem yourself, you immediately see it in the nurse.
But then again, sometimes you just don't.
That would be, you could see it in the nurse, I suppose.
I think being a self-trainer and Delta trainer, you learn.
Being a self-trainer and a Delta trainer?
Yeah.
You learn.
Because it's a very stressful,
very stressful course. So you don't start off out as an expert, but you become confident
yeah.
by the job. Yes.
I think the important point is that when people are suffering from mental health, because of the stigma and because of the issues associated with it, they hide it.
Yeah.
And they can become very adept at hiding it. So feeling confident at recognising it, if the person doesn't want it to be recognised, they may well do a very good job of hiding the fact that they're, because they feel that they don't feel safe to disclose that to themselves as much to anybody else.
And that's a very interesting point, the idea of hiding it. Well, a lot of symptoms that people suffer from are, some of those symptoms that people have are visible, some of those are not so visible, and you're not always in the same room as them so to be able to spot this. So, when I talk about how confident you recognising, instead of going to how confident you feel, how confident do you feel at recognising the symptoms of poor mental health? Okay, so I've got a little exercise for you. The activity here, I'm going to need a volunteer. So Mike, could you help me? Could you just go around yeah, just one per person, or just spread them around. Could you help me just by spreading them around? There's what you've got is you're going to be given a handout. I hope that you can see it. And what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to find some descriptions of conditions on the handouts, and there are 4 on each handout. And 18 total. So you only have to look at 4. Don't try looking at all 8 because there won't be time. So I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to look at 4 conditions. So just with somebody next to you or in a small group, look at 4 conditions in pairs or groups. Decide what kind of diagnosed condition this is describing. Okay, one more minute. That tweets keep appearing. Tweets about this.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Scores on the doors. Right. So you either had, or should have had, either conditions 1 to 4 or 5 to 8. So, if you had condition 1, just tell me, condition 1, what do you think? Give me some... Depression. Condition 1, depression. Condition 2?
Mania.
Mania? Got a manic thing? Hypermania, or mania, yeah. Condition 3?
Bipolar.
A lot of people saying bipolar. You're right, bipolar. What they used to call manic depression is now bipolar disorder. Condition 4?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Is it just anxiety?
General anxiety.
Generally, yeah, thanks to that lady. Exactly, it's generalised. It's not specific, it's a generalised anxiety disorder. Condition 5?
OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder.
Can we check? Yeah, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Condition 6? Did you have who had condition 6? Paranoia? Is that a... Blunted, flat or approaching, changing appetite, odd ideas. Odd ideas is a clue. Suspiciousness, irritability. Somebody said paranoia. It's actually psychosis or a psychotic disorder. That's the diagnosis. Condition 7.
That's a panic attack.
That's a panic attack, is it? Yeah, I heard. This is not the first time the amygdala has come up at the conference. Fiona Morclins mentioned it in her session yesterday. It's panic attack or panic disorder. So if you're diagnosed with panic disorder, you have panic attacks repeatedly. That's what I have, along with generalised anxiety disorder. That's my diagnosis. And condition 8, mentioned psychosis.
Schizophrenia?
Yeah, you're right. Schizophrenia. Okay, put those away. Last question. Could you say whether you have felt supported in the workplace and in what way? So this is another question from the survey. I want you to get just some quick responses from you, just a quick thought. Could you say whether you felt supported in the workplace and in what ways?
In my first job, no.
In your first job, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even get support in dealing with a difficult student, so if that come up, probably not.
No. Yeah, anyone else?
My previous job.
Yeah.
I had to take 2 weeks off, and my manager didn't count that as part of my annual leave. I felt that was very supportive, and I wasn't allowed to take paid leave according to the contract, but he gave me that option. And I think I will never forget that.
Anyone else? One more? Yes.
Just add another positive one. The way my organization works, we're very small teams, and then one person that's a designated member care person, and they have regular times to check up with people.
Yeah.
But there's also just sort of a culture of you see everyone on the team all the time outside of work, and so it's a lot harder to hide, I think, which is one way really good. But they work really hard to support friendly relationships, so that there's that community support.
Thank you. Some good answers. It's a very long quote that is already on the blog post which I published this week last year. This comes from Nicola Walker, who is a lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire. She's the first person I've ever mentioned as being somebody who took part in my survey, but I've got her permission to use this quote. I'll very quickly go through it. My team at the university were amazing. Other lecturers who have also suffered from a similar experience talked to me. I was able to see a staff counsellor. It was the first time that I shared my own issues with anxiety. As for the past 10 years of working here, I had kept all my problems to myself. I feel a lot better for being open about it, talking about disclosure. I have also been looking into doing research into teacher anxiety in ELT. And I've noticed in general education, it is a much talked about subject, but there is so little information in the ELT industry. But I know Sandy Million, who's sitting here, has started a blog post called Useful Links in ELT.
Useful links on mental health in ELT.
Useful links for mental health in ELT. So specifically looking at this issue within our industry. I won't go on because you can see the slides and read it for yourself. This is actually the final question today. Have you ever received training in how to support teachers' mental health? Again, no time to really discuss. Quick answers about this? No? But you did describe earlier about what happens in your work.
Yeah, so I've done mental health first aid training, but it's not specific to teachers, it's just in general.
In general.
Yeah.
So there's nothing specifically for teachers. But we can transpose the information and what we learn on courses like that. I've also done the Mental Health First Aid England training through Mind, which is the mental health charity here in the UK. I mean, there are organisations now, like an organisation called Bamboo Mental Health, which is a business. They go in and they troubleshoot mental health issues in industries, and that would include that. I mean, when asked the question about whether training has ever been received to support teachers' mental health, in my research, 153 out of 228 responses said no, none, or never. Some did elaborate by saying that this would be useful, interesting, or that they were keen to have training. Some had taken some training outside of ELT or general workshops about recognising problems. And a handful of informants in the research had studied psychology, and a few were trained counsellors. Several referred to safeguarding training, but not specifically mental health. One had suicide safe talk training. And answers were brief, and there was generally not much experience for informants to disclose here. One person said that they had picked up things from blogs, while one other said they'd actually held a workshop for teachers in their school on emotional burnout. Nonetheless, the anecdotal evidence, and from what I've seen and read over the past year, is that this is changing, but slowly. But there's still a lot more that can be done within ELT. As I said already, Bamboo Mental Health is one organisation, and the best place that I can direct you to would be Mental Health First Aid England. So they're based here in the UK, but they provide a lot of resources for institutions, for employers, for line managers, in how they can be trained around this topic and trained to support their staff. At the start I said I wasn't medically qualified, so I do want to draw attention to a couple of major resources on supporting employees in the workplace. And this is an organisation called Mental Health Foundation, so it's www.mentalhealth.org.uk. The full link, again, it's on the slides. Lots of downloadable material from them, support mental health at work. And finally, Mental Health First Aid England, which I've already described. My handout, the task that I asked you to do, where you described or found the diagnosing from the symptoms, comes from Mental Health First Aid England. And they train people, certainly in this country. I've no knowledge of, I've no knowledge of mental health training that goes on outside of the UK, but I'm based in the UK, so I can only speak from that point of view. But I'd be very interested to know that if in your context, in your country, whether there's some organisation equivalent to either Mind or Mental Health First Aid England that does a similar thing. So please let me know, or come up to me at the end and talk to me about that. Okay, I'm coming to the end now. The idea of first aider is something that Natasha Devon, as I mentioned earlier, has been campaigning for. We talk about parity of self-esteem in this country, but usually the funding does not match that of physical health. Just as there should legally be a first aider for every employer above a certain size, so there should be a designated mental health first aider. For now, there is not the equivalent resources, and mental health first aid will probably fall under the same route as the physical first aider. So in conclusion, the best thing I believe is to train yourselves. Get hold of these free resources and educate others in your workplace, in your context. That's my references. If you click on that or you scan that QR code, that will take you to my slides. And on my slides you'll find 3 pages of around 67, 68, it's gone, but there was links to, obviously I'm not allowed to show you that, but if you download the slides, I'll try and get that back up on the screen, and you can click on any, they're all clickable links, they're all hyperlinks, they're my personal bookmarks from my computer, from my Google Chrome. And thank you very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Mike, just do it on the computer.
And how do I get the slides? I want to get the QR code, though. Okay. That's it. Yeah, so that's the QR code, which is if you take one thing away, just get the QR code. That should work. An iPhone camera, it should just automatically link, or you need a QR code reader, that'll take you to the slides, which are now.
Yeah.
On time.